Welcome back to our discussion on biological classification. After completing the kingdoms Monera and Protista, we move ahead towards kingdom fungi. Now, what is kingdom fungi? Now, the basic characteristics of kingdom fungi, as we already have seen in the initial discussion, that the kingdom fungi will include all eukaryotic multicellular organisms. They will be eukaryotic cellular structure. At the same time, they will be multicellular, of course, with some exceptions. One very good example of unicellular fungi is yeast. We all are familiar with it. Other than that, these organisms are heterotrophs. They are purely heterotrophs. That is one prime reason why they could not be placed along with plants. They are purely heterotrophs, and heterotrophic mode of nutrition in fungi may be in the form of saprotrophs or maybe parasites even. But basically, they are always considered as decomposers. They act as decomposers when they are saprophytic, and of course disease causing whenever they are parasitic. These organisms are not mobile. That means they are fixed to a particular location. Like plants, they remain fixed to a particular location. Then one more main difference with plants is the cell wall. Now, cell wall of plants, as we all are familiar, it is made up of cellulose, but in this case it is made up of chitin. The cell walls are made up of chitins. So these are some of the basic characteristics of fungi. Reproduction: they usually reproduce through the formation of spores, whether it is sexual or asexual, but ultimately spores will be formed, which are tiny structures, cellular structures that are produced from the body, and then they will be dispersed, which upon falling on a different suitable substratum, they will again produce new fungus. So these are some of the basic characteristics of kingdom fungi. So here we have few pictures which represents different forms of kingdom fungi. These are the different forms. Now we usually see all such forms growing around us. These are growing naturally upon dead, decomposed wooden pieces or humus forms. Now here, this is the parasitic form, which is in fact in these red patches that you see, these are the fungus. These are the fungus which are growing upon the leaf, causing diseases. Then here, this is a petri dish. This is the fungus that has been grown in the lab. And in the lab also, we can make the fungus grow if we provide it suitable medium. So let us move ahead to study the body structure. Now, how is the body structure? The body structure of fungus, it mainly grows underground or beneath. That means upon the substratum where it is growing, like say if it is a dead log piece, if it is the ground, then the main structure, the body structure, the vegetative structure will be found below the ground, below the soil. Or if it is growing upon, say, as simple as a bread piece or rotten food, the main body structure will be found among that decomposing part of the food. What are they made up of? Their body is made up of hyphae. We have to remember this term, hyphae or hypha. Hyphae is plural, hypha is singular. The body is made up of hypha. What are hypha? These are thin strands. As you can see here, this is a microscopic view of it. These are the thin strands. As you can see here, these structures, these are the thin strands, or even here, this is a diagrammatic view. This way, long thread-like structures which extend. Here, the same thing, which extend, it makes up the main body of the fungus. These thread-like or hair-like structures may further branch. As you can see, they have branched. And then what will happen? So this way, lot of branching takes place, and then they accumulate to form a bigger mass of or bigger collection of hypha, which will be referred to as mycelium. This is referred to as mycelium. So the mycelium represents the entire body structure of the fungus. Individually, they are called as hypha. So wherever fungus is growing, if it is suppose a parasite, if it is a parasite, then these strands, these hair-like strands, they will grow in between the cells of the organism. If it is suppose growing upon the skin of humans, because we have fungal infections many times, for example ringworm, it is a disease in humans. So what will happen, it will grow in between the cells. The hyphal structures will grow in between the cells. It will keep on penetrating the body of this by growing in between the cells, and then it will take nutrition from the adjoining cells of the body of that particular organism. Thus they will grow, and if it is growing upon a dead material, this way as it is shown here, then it will release chemicals whereby they will go on decomposing the substrate around them and then absorb the nutrients. What grows above the ground? Now, what is the part that we usually see above the ground? In fungus, many a times you must have observed which what we commonly call as mushrooms, but all of them are of course not mushrooms. You see some enlarged structures growing above the ground. Now, what is that? That is mainly the reproductive structure. Also, we call as the fruiting body. Now, this is the structure which will produce the spores. Spores are the tiny structures that can again give rise to new hyphal forms that will produce. So only when it is time to reproduce, they have matured, then you will see the emergence of this fruiting body. All this time the hypha will be beneath the substratum, invisible to our naked eyes. We will not be aware that a fungus is growing. Only when the fruiting body appears, then we can make out that the organism is present and it is about to reproduce. So this is the fruiting body, and this is the microscopic structure. So here, now furthermore, the hypha sometimes what happens, they are separated by walls. As you can see now, as already mentioned, cell wall of fungus is made up of chitin. So here you can see each of the cells, they are separated. Here the blue ones are the nuclei, and they are separated, they have separation walls. As you can see, they have separation walls. Now if the hypha has such separation walls, which we call as septum or septa, then the hypha will be referred to as septate. So septate hypha, if you get the term, it should be understood that that particular hypha of fungus has separation walls in between. And if there are no separation walls, then we can call that as aseptate or sinusoidal hypha. So if there are no separation walls and it appears all the nuclei are just present within the cytoplasm in a multinucleated condition, it appears like a multinucleated condition without any separation walls, then we will call it as sinusoidal hypha or aseptate hypha. So these two terms please do remember, because as we refer to the different classes, we will not explain what is aseptate condition, but simply we will be mentioning septate and sinusoidal, the terms. So the moment you hear the terms, you should be able to recall what is the meaning of septate and what is the meaning of sinusoidal. Now, how do fungi reproduce? So how do fungi reproduce? There are different modes of reproduction in fungi: budding, fission, bud fission, sporulation. So here, budding, what will happen? The organism will form a small outgrowth and that will further grow or separate out to give rise to the new organism. For example, you have seen in case of yeast. Fission, the cell simply splits. Bud fission, that means the outgrowth will further split. Then sporulation, which is the most common method. Sporulation, that is formation of spores. So these are the different types of asexual or reproductive or vegetative reproduction. So now what will happen? Formed by the aerial hyphae of one organism, new organisms are identical to the organism. So what will happen? The hypha, one or two of the hypha which were growing beneath the substratum, they will grow above ground. They will grow above the substratum and then start producing the spores. So that is the asexual spores. Now asexual spores can be of different types. For example, sporangiospore or conidiospores, zoospores. So these are some of the, here also you can see zoospores, sporangiospores, chlamydospores, oidea and conidia. These are different types of spores. These are different types of spores as to how they are formed. Conidiophore. Conidiophore will be the stalk which will produce the spores. These are producing chains. You can see conidia. Now, zoospores will be the ones which will be produced single. Sporangiospores also produce in groups. Conidia will be produced in chain-like structures, as you can see here in chain-like structures. Now, they do reproduce sexually sometimes. Now, sexual reproduction will involve fusion of two nuclei. Now, there is nothing like gamete formation. So, here what will happen? The sexual spores will fuse together. The nuclei will fuse together. That will be called as sexual reproduction. After fusion, what will happen? That particular fused cell will again further form the spores. They will form the spores. With the spores, for example, ascospore and basidiospore. These two are types of sexual spores and these two are types of asexual spores. So this is also like how the conidia are formed. This is the hypha which is growing beneath the substratum, and then a one or two hypha of it will grow above the substratum and then produce the spores. Yeah, these are the conidiospores, conidia. When they fall on the substratum, they will germinate to produce new hypha, which will give rise to this type of structures. Same applicable with the other types of spores too. Now, how do they reproduce? Sexually. Now, during sexual reproduction, which we also call as dikaryokinesis. Okay, karyokinesis, dikaryon, formation of dikaryon. Now, during this process, what happens? Two events occur. One is plasmogamy and the other is called as karyogamy. Plasmogamy. Gamy word originates from gamos. Gamos means union. Plasmo from plasma. So what happens? The union of the cytoplasm is known as plasmogamy and union of the nucleus is known as karyogamy. Karyo word is always associated with the nucleus. So now during fusion, if it needs to reproduce sexually, then if you can make out here, this is a hypha. This is a hypha. So in this hypha, what will happen? The two nuclei of adjacent cells or maybe two nuclei of two different hypha, either from two different hypha or within the same hypha two different nuclei. They will the plasma membrane will fuse together initially. As you can see here, these are nuclei, these are cells, two cells maybe belong to the same hypha or maybe belong to two different hypha of opposite strains. We call them as opposite strains. They will come close together. There will be first fusion of the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm have fused together, which we call as plasmogamy. Here, this event has already taken place. So once it happens, then what we will call that hypha as dikaryotic hypha. Now, dikaryotic hypha means two with two nuclei. It means a cell with two nuclei. So we will call it as dikaryotic hypha or dikaryon. It is also called as di. Di means two. Karyo word comes from nucleus. So it will be two nuclei here. Now it remains as such. Then gradually, what will happen? The nuclei will fuse together. They will combine together. So here you can see they have combined together. So once they combine together, what will happen? They will form one single nucleus inside the cell. After which, it needs to undergo division. Now, why does it need to undergo division? Now, you must be familiar with two terms, haploid and diploid. Now, haploid means when an organism has one set of chromosome. And diploid means when an organism has two sets of chromosomes. The number is in a pair. Now, usually organisms are diploid, but with the exception of fungi, fungi are mostly haploids. They can be mostly haploids. So here what will happen? The original organism is haploid, like it has only n number of chromosomes here. N number of chromosomes, one set of chromosomes. Now the number, it can vary. When this type of fusion takes place, what will happen? This had n, this had n. When they fuse together, it will become 2n. That is dikaryotic. It will become 2n, diploid. But the original organism is what? Yes, it is haploid. So now what is required is that the cell, the nucleus, has to go back to the original form. Otherwise, it will become some other organism. So after fusion of the nuclei, it is important that they undergo meiotic type of cell division. Meiosis is a type of cell division which can help in the dividing the chromosome number into two equal halves. So what will happen as a result of meiosis, which is taking place only in the cell that has undergone fusion? So here what will happen? They will form nuclei which will have haploid number of chromosome as like the original one. Why this is possible? It is possible only because of meiosis. So occurrence of meiosis is very much required during sexual reproduction. Then after that, what will happen? After that, further they will divide. Once they have reduced the chromosome number, they have become n. After that, they will continue mitosis to increase the number of cells if required. If not, they will remain as it is. That will result into formation of the spores. This will now be the spores. As already I showed in the previous slide, the sexual spores which can be ascospores or basidiospores. Two types usually, ascospores and basidiospores. So these spores will be produced in these. Now where are all these events taking place? In the hypha. Once the division has completed, they will form, see, this type of the outgrowths, structures, cup-like structures, umbrella-shaped structures like the mushrooms that you see, which will contain the sexual spores. Once they fall on the substratum, they will again start producing the new hypha. So this is how sexual mode of reproduction occurs in fungi. That is called as dikaryokinesis. We can call it as dikaryokinesis, and when the new cell has two nuclei together, we will call it as dikaryon. Now, classification. Fungi can be further classified into four classes. Phycomycetes, which are the lowermost fungi, very simple in structure. Ascomycetes, which are sac fungi. That means these organisms, this particular group of fungi, they can produce asexually as well as sexually. And sexually, when they produce, like just now I have explained, so they will produce that cup-shaped or ball-shaped structure. Okay, ascus, which we call as ascus, that will be seen above the ground, above the substratum. Now, Basidiomyces, the other type, which will produce this type of fruiting bodies. This fruiting body is what? It will contain the sexual spores. Then the fourth category is Deuteromyces, which is also known as fungi imperfecti, because in this group, the sexual phase is still not known. It has still not been observed. Example is Fusarium. These are mostly parasitic fungi. Mostly they are infectious forms. Whereas the others, these three mostly, they are decomposers. Some parasitic forms might be there, but they are mostly parasitic forms. Now, Phycomyces, example is Rhizopus or Muca. This is very commonly known as bread mold. They grow upon bread pieces. Ascomyces, commonly called sac fungi, example Neurospora. Basidiomyces, club fungi, example Agaricus mushrooms. Deuteromyces, example Fusarium. In the next discussion, we will go into details about the each type of these groups of fungi. Thank you.